America's founders are calling. It's your opportunity to respond. This is the Liberty Brief Podcast with your host, Robert Melso, featuring Dr. Thomas Giordano. Welcome to episode 2 of the Liberty Brief Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Melso, and today we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Thomas Giordano, author of the book Unalienable, What It Really Means and Why It Matters. In the last episode, we discussed the Big Bang as the primal source of the laws of nature, the concept of life, and some notions on natural law. We also talked about the transmission of intelligence in physical bodies through time and identity. In this episode, we're going to show how Western civilization really came about. First, we're going to have to look at the origins of ourselves according to science. Hello, Dr. Tom.
Hello, Rob.
Dr. Tom, in the last podcast, we spoke about the transmission of intelligence or code. Can you tell us a little bit about our species and where the information we have on our species came from? The last time we discussed natural rights that were silently with us from the time we came about, and we were in a pure state of nature. And then it began to take on more formal considerations when we started to form societies.
Yes, there's a task. You're asking me to summarize the existence of man on this planet. I'll try my best in the briefest way I can. I would say that your observation, that you're right on that observation. Remember, we're not talking about mystic investigations into the spirit of man. We're looking at the science of our physical existence. Firstly, we gather solid information on ourselves basically through 3 different fields of investigation. The first is anthropology, which is a scientific study of the origin, the behavior, and the physical, social, and cultural development of humans. It's basically the study of fossilized corporeal remains, bones and teeth and stuff like that. And then there's archaeology. This is a systematic study of past human life and culture by recovery and the examination of remaining material evidence, such as graves, buildings, tools, pottery, and the like. It is a study of our past through material remains or the artifacts of human activity. And then, of course, there's history, which is the study of the written chronological record of events, of the lives or the development of a people or of institutions. These are often accompanied by an explanation or a commentary on those human events.
So, Dr. Tom, you're saying that history actually begins with the written word.
Yes, that's correct. Anything before the written word is prehistory. Anything after is history. The word comes to us from Greek through Latin and literally means inquiry. We have a tendency to mix up terms dealing with the march of man through the ages because the time span we perceive in man's existence on this planet is measured by different methods and categories of time frames, depending upon the study.
Okay, Dr. Tom. So what can you tell us about what we know about ourselves?
Well, anthropological investigations indicate that the genus Homo has a fossil record which dates back to about 2.5 to 3.5 million years. Now, members of the genus Homo are distinguished from other hominids by an erect posture, a large cranium, a 2-footed gait or bipedalism, fully opposable thumbs, and the development of tool making, their ability to make tools. There were approximately 9 different species in the genus Homo, and all of them except Homo sapiens, that's us, are presently extinct. Homo sapiens neanderthalensis was our last surviving relative and died out between 24,000 and 30,000 years ago. The
I
word
don't know
homo.
about that. I don't know about that, Dr. Tom. I had a roommate that I think qualified.
Well, there are people who say that, the Neanderthal still walking among us.
This was back in college.
Yeah, well,
back in college, so.
Well, that wasn't quite 30,000 years ago, but the word homo is the Latin name for man in the original sense of human being or person. The word human is from the Latin humanus, and it's an adjective cognate of the word homo. The word sapiens is also from Latin, and it means one who knows or wise man. So yeah, I can understand. You may not have had a roommate who was a Homo sapiens sapiens. He would have been a Homo sapiens, whatever.
He did walk upright, so I guess he had that going for him.
Oh, so he didn't knuckle walk. Eh? Okay.
No. When they use the term species, what do they actually mean? Here's why I'm asking that question. It's difficult for me to delineate between one species and the next if we're following a timeline. I mean, it's not like one day somebody wakes up and now all of a sudden he's a new species.
No, it doesn't work that way. The word species comes to us also from Latin, and it means a particular sort, kind, or type. In the biological sense, it is a group of closely related organisms that are very similar to each other and are usually capable of interbreeding and producing fertile or viable offspring. Okay. That's what it means in biology. So it's let's say, a closely related group of organisms that can have children that in turn can have children.
Okay. So you're saying that our kind, that is mankind, has been around for about, I think it's 3 million years?
No. No, the genus Homo, our genus, has been around for about that long. The species sapien and the subspecies sapiens, or anatomically modern man, has been around for somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 years, according to the fossil record. According to the Darwinian theory, we evolved as a species from a common ancestor as the other species in the same genus, and the genus evolved from others in the same subtribe. In other words, Darwin didn't claim that we evolved from the apes. I don't know where that came from. His claim was that we and the apes had a common ancestor going backward in the taxonomic classification. The apes went off in their direction and we went off in ours. So the taxonomical order of classification is kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, subfamily, tribe, subtribe, genus, species, and subspecies.
Okay. All right. I think I get all that. But don't ask me to recite those again.
No, no, I won't.
Okay. So this is the description of man, the species.
Right.
What is it that you were referring to in the first episode dealing with the transmission of code through time, the species, the code through time?
Well, it's precisely that, the transmission of DNA. Well, look, if we take a look, let's take a step backwards a minute. If we take a further look at the two basic forms of matter, what we immediately see is that organic carbon-based life forms are carrying that genetic code and are transmitting it into the following generations through a reproductive process. Inorganic material doesn't seem to be so endowed. I mean, you can't put two pieces of gold together and tomorrow wake up with a third piece of gold. In other words, a chunk of gold or silver or some other inert material remains static in its properties and will remain so presumably for eternity if nothing else acts upon it in the form of some chemical reaction or interaction like corrosion or oxidation.
Okay, so let me ask this question. Now we know that our specific species excluding my college roommate, has been around for 300,000 years.
Yeah.
That's what I've been told, and that we can infer this from anthropology and archaeology.
Right.
You spoke of prehistory and history and the dividing line between them. What were we doing before we developed systems of writing?
Well, the information that we've accumulated, if you look at it closely, we were developing technologies for our survival that were passed on through interpersonal instruction from one generation to the next. We went from working with stone, wood, antlers, and other natural materials to working with metals. Excuse me. We refer to these long-term time frames as ages, the Stone Age, the Copper Age, and so on. These are further broken down into subdivisions within the ages. So we would have the Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, and the Neolithic within the Stone Age, for example. Now, these are time frames related to archaeology, showing a progression of technological development. Interspliced with these are the anthropological aspects of tribal and social development. After the Copper Age, we enter into the Bronze Age, and it is at this point that those systems of writings begin. They begin to appear in the West. That is where we, in our Western civilization, coming up from Sumer and into the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. And it is at that point that history begins.
Okay, Dr. Tom, but it seems that those ages, they were quite lengthy. There was a long time from one to the other. Am I right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
sure, absolutely.
Thousands of years.
Exactly. If we're referencing the geologic time scale, all right, the present epoch, called the Holocene, begins at the end of the last glacial period of the current ice age, somewhere around 10,000 BC, all right, and continues to the present. The beginning of the Mesolithic is usually considered to correspond with the beginning of the Holocene epoch. So if we're looking at it, prehistory runs from the period between the appearance of genus Homo, about 3 million years ago, to the invention of writing systems 5,000 years ago, during the Bronze Age, for the ancient Near East. Now, our species began to appear in the Mesolithic about 300,000 years ago. So it seems that it only took us 295,000 years to start writing.
Well, that would correlate to some of the slow learners that I'm seeing around me.
Yeah, exactly. It could be the reason for it.
Myself included sometimes. I find it strange, though, that these divisions seem so cut and dry.
Oh, yeah, you're right. These are really basically rules of thumb because the technological and social developments varied among people in different geographical areas. I mean, it wasn't like, some guy named Joey came out of the woods one day and said, "Hey, hold everything, put them stone arrowheads down. I got some bronze." Obviously these periods overlap until things become more diffuse over wider ranges. If you were to think about it, a stone arrowhead, let's say, is just as efficient at taking down a prey as a bronze arrowhead. So sometimes people are a little bit reticent to give up what they know to start using something that they don't know.
Okay, well, first of all, Joey sounds like he came from my neighborhood in South Philadelphia. But
yeah, he probably was, probably from 13th and Tasker or something like that.
Okay, if I can summarize this point, let me try to summarize. We started out in a state of nature, and for a couple of 100,000 years, nothing changed. We used our intellects only as a tool for survival. And along with the inborn intelligence of our genes being passed on, we learned instructions, survival skills. They were passed on from one generation to the next, and on a person-to-person basis, because there was no history, no written history. Have I got that right so far?
Yes, that's correct. There was nothing written. It appears to be the case, but I wouldn't say we weren't doing anything. We were evolving. During that time frame, we started to develop settlements, and there was the domestication of animals and things like that, and agriculture started to come out of the Fertile Crescent. So yes, we were doing something. But as far as let's say the progression of intellect or knowledge was basically stagnant.
Well, let me counter that. I was recently out west, and I learned a little bit about the Hopi Indians. Now,
yes.
The Indians, for the most part, Navajo and so forth, they didn't have a written language. However, the Hopis passed their history down through verbal storytelling.
Yes.
And it's actually quite accurate. There are people designated within the tribe to recite the whole history of the tribe from beginning to end. And they go through years just learning that. So we really can't say for sure that culture didn't advance without written words.
Oh, no,
Am I
no.
onto something there?
Yes, sure. But you have to understand that the American Indians, if you think about it, they did have an oral tradition, but they also had memory beads. They had belts that were composed of beads that would stimulate the memory and keep it alive, and that was transmitted that way. In other words, there was a solidity to the stories that were being told. They were putting a mass to it by the belt of beads that recounted the history of their people, their individual people. And the American Indians, practically every name for every American Indian tribe, is the people to distinguish themselves from other tribes. But yes, if I have to say this, though, if I am a father and I'm sitting by a campfire teaching my son how to flint knap, I've passed my genes and my knowledge on to him. If I write a book, though, and this is aside from, transmitting things word of mouth, because, oral history is word of mouth. If I write a book on flint knapping, I've passed my genes on to my son and my knowledge, but my knowledge went not only to him, but also on to the sons of many other fathers who I don't know. On the other hand, on the one hand, I'm passing genetic intelligence on, and on the other, I'm passing a parallel intelligence stream of acquired knowledge, which could span more than one generation into the future. And it's not really subject to alteration like the oral tradition is. It may be subject to interpretation, the written word, but alteration, no, unless you want to change the definition of words, which seems to be a tactic which will seem to be a tactic in the future. Believe me.
Well, okay. So I find this interesting. It's an interesting way to look at things. The passing of genetic information concurrent with the passing of learned information. So when we get to written history, there are oral traditions and there are written traditions.
That's right.
Talking about things that happened in the past, myths and legends and things like that. That's how it all started.
Yes, of course. Of course. And in our culture, in the Western civilization, the Iliad and the Odyssey, for example, were both recited first in the oral tradition and then recorded after the Greeks adopted the Phoenician alphabet in, I believe it was Linear B. They were written down centuries after, and this fact caused these events to be placed in doubt. If you think about it, it was placed in doubt until Heinrich Schliemann in 1850s basically went to go prove that Troy existed. You see, the problem in oral traditions is that they are subject to alteration, things added and subtracted, possibly to fit the audience that's sitting in front of you. If you're if you're some bard hopping from Samos to Icaria and then on to Sicily, recounting the escapades of Achilles and Odysseus, something is bound to get modified. Then he goes and teaches it to his son and gets killed in a spat between Athens and Sparta, and no one can verify that what his son is recounting is what the father recounted. You see the complexity there. So yes, we had an oral tradition, but history is something that was written down that is subject to further investigation, and it could be as many as 100 generations afterwards.
Okay, so now we're getting into the meat of the matter, because if I understand your premise, this parallel information, this stream of intelligence started, then it continues to this day. Can you tell us about history in our Western civilization, when it started and so on? I think perhaps some of our listeners are beginning to wonder what all this has to do about our thoughts of the founding fathers.
Yeah. Well, my intention here is to explain that how the experiences of our ancestors were recorded for future scrutiny. Once those people transitioned from the hunter-gatherer societies to agriculture and domestication of animals, their basic survival needs were being met, okay? This gradually gave them spare time to contemplate their position in the universe that surrounded them. As technology changed, natural resources were gathered, and commerce began on a wide scale, especially with tin and copper during the Bronze Age, until the catastrophic collapse sometime between 1250 and 1150 BC. Both before and after the collapse, trade routes, invasions, and conquests allowed for the dissemination and comparison of ideas. Our written history actually begins about 600 years later, after the Bronze Age collapse, with a Greek traveler going around the known world asking questions and recording the answers he got. That's why historia means inquiry. He was asking questions. His name was Herodotus of Halicarnassus. Now, his book, Histories, was an inquiry into why the Greeks and the Persians hated each other so much and why there was so much friction between them. It was the first time that there was let's say, an us versus them idea of identity in written form. He chronicles events in prehistory or proto-history, which precede even the reasons for the Trojan War down to his time in the 5th century before Christ. Herodotus then is now called the father of history. He wrote the first history book. After Herodotus, in the same time frame, comes Thucydides and his history of the Peloponnesian War. He wrote an examination of the friction between Athens and Sparta for control of what we now call Greece. This was an us versus us conflict between two different groups of the same people vying for geographic control. And it was also a comparison of naval forces fighting land forces with two different sets of military tactics. The next great work that we would come across would be Anabasis. It was written by a man named Xenophon. Now, this recounted the adventures of 10,000 hoplite Greek mercenaries in the pay of Cyrus fighting Darius II in a struggle for control of the Achaemenid Empire after the death of Artaxerxes. When Cyrus gets killed in a battle, the Greek forces are left stranded and had to find their way back through hostile territory to the Greek colonies around the Black Sea and then on to Athens. So to answer your question, history starts with Herodotus of Halicarnassus, and it continues on from there.
All right, Dr. Tom, you mentioned the term proto-history. I think that means history as it happens before written down. Is that what that means?
Well, actually, prehistory is before it's written down. So proto-history is it comes from Greek, like a lot of things. Proton in Greek means first, and history is obviously inquiry. Now, the term refers to the period of time between prehistory and history when a culture or a civilization has not yet developed their own writing, but are referenced to by other cultures which have. For example, the Trojan War had no written Greek reports in it, but there are references to the war in Hittite and Egyptian diplomatic correspondences. The actual name of the city was not Troy, by the way. The Hittites called it Wilusa, and the Greeks called it Ilion. Proto-history runs from the late 4th millennium BC, 4,000 years before Christ, in the ancient Near East, to the present, with recently discovered isolated tribes around the world. So, you say, what, to the present proto-history? Yeah. If you discover a tribe in, let's say, New Guinea or in the Amazon basin, they don't have a writing system yet. So our description of them places them in proto-history. So, it's all, it's relative to the tribe and their ability, or the people and their ability to write. So, we're dealing with strictly a historical record.
Okay, well, you've just mentioned the ancient Near East, and we've been talking about the Greeks. But there's another ancient civilization. I mean, there's the Hebrews. Where do they fit into this picture? I mean, we also recognize the importance of Judeo-Christian traditions. Where are they, let's say, with respect to the Trojan War?
Oh, yeah, there are many ancient cultures, the Phoenicians, all the way up from Sumerians, and everything. Yes, with respect to the Hebrews, the life of Moses and the exodus of the Jews from bondage in Egypt occurred in the late Bronze Age, some 200 years before the Trojan War. Now, since Moses is credited for writing the first 5 scrolls, or the first 5 books, or the Greeks would have said, called it Pentateuch, and the Hebrews would call it the Torah. These are the first 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We could say that the Old Testament was started around 1400 BC and was added to by other sages over the next 1,000 years. It was finished in the 5th century BC. In other words, by the time Jesus of Nazareth appears, the Torah had been formulated for about 500 years or so. Of course, Jesus was born in the Iron Age, and the New Testament was written, let's say it was compiled during the historical periods we now call classical antiquity and post-classical history.
So, Dr. Tom, what you're saying is the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, and so forth, they're in part proto-history because they were written later after those events occurred.
No, because the Hebrews had a language, and Moses, well, if you could say, with the beginning for Moses was the 10 Commandments, okay? And that was written by the finger of God, okay? So that was brought to us by God. But the Hebrews already had a language. They already had a language. So it would be history for them. You have to remember that the Torah is part of the Hebrew tradition, and that tradition is historical. It's written down. It was written down. The events that are described in it are prehistorical. Okay. But that wouldn't be considered proto-history for the Hebrews. It would be prehistory for the Hebrews. It would be let's say the oral tradition set down in writing. Okay. That's what the beginning of the Torah was. So it does refer to what would be prehistory for the Hebrews, and it eventually continues on through history because the life of Moses is recounted and everything else, all the way up to about like I said, 500 years before. I think the last contribution to the Torah was in the 5th century. I'm pretty sure of that.
Well, you can obviously tell how easily I'm confused, but let's step back a minute and look at what we've discussed so far. I know I asked for a summarization of our existence on the planet to see if we could get an understanding of where we came from and how this was perceived by our founding generation. We looked at our beginnings, I guess. We looked at the ancient development into societies, technologies, and writing. So where do we go from here? I mean, how does it apply to the incorporation of natural law, which is what we're really after, and into forming our government? In other words, do we have all this information in our past, and what does it mean, and how is it used?
Well, the first thing is that you have to understand that there are several things we can learn by knowing the past. The very first observation we make is that human nature is constant. It doesn't change. As a matter of fact, Thucydides, the justification for writing the history of the Peloponnesian War was because people did not change. And he wanted to say, hey, he even says it. People don't change, and that's the reason I'm writing this. So you might learn something from this recounting. People then and people now, they really haven't changed that much. That's basically what I can say when it comes to what motivates us to do the things we do. The second is that we begin to understand that the conditions of life for the common man, for the overwhelming majority of our time here, is, it was miserable. We started in a brutal, unforgiving natural environment for survival against the elements within a pure state of nature. When we started to organize societies, we were then placed into classes dominated by groups wielding absolute power over the natural resources of the lands where we were. They dominated our lives and our labor. Freedom, until the classical Greeks, was an unknown concept. There wasn't even a word to describe such a state. Third, is what we always, one of the characteristics of man is that he's always seeking to implement ways or to find ways to enhance his survival. We do this by technical advancements and an ability to adapt our environments to us rather than adapting ourselves to the environment. Rob, if you will allow me a few minutes to further clarify the importance of our past history and the search for understanding in a fast and loose way, rather than go into minute details, perhaps this would be a better way to show what the founding fathers were drawing upon when they formed our government and why.
Sure. We spent some time giving the backstory up until 1776, and there's a lot of time in human experience between them and the Bronze Age and such. So go ahead.
Okay. Well, we have to consider that the accumulation of written history is like an archive of human thought and expression, and it was accrued simultaneously in different parts of the Western world. In other words, during those 1,000 years of compiling the Old Testament in the ancient Near East, those in the Greek world were creating philosophical schools of thought, headed by people like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and the like. Contemporaneously, in the hundreds of years after the Bronze Age collapse, the Greeks were experimenting with fledgling democracies in about 1,500 individual city-states, or polis, as they say in Greek.
Okay. Well, it seems to me they took the opportunity of dissolving the traditional kingship and tyrannical models of social order to try something else, right? They were still, however, really, really far from what we would consider free societies. Am I correct?
Oh, yes. Yes, you are. In fact, demokratia in Greek literally means people power, all right? It comes from the two words demos, which is people, and kratia, which means power. So in this time frame, Greek influence was spreading by colonization and conquest east to the Black Sea and west to Italy, Sicily, and North Africa, competing with other peoples like the Phoenicians for trade routes. In fact, it was the Greeks who named Italy Italy. They called it Vitellieu, or the land of the calf, the male calves, the land of the vitello. That's what we would say in Italian, I vitelli. They're male bulls, young male bulls. So they named most of southern Italy, Calabria, Calabris, a beautiful font, beautiful spring. You have towns like Gallipoli today, Calaspolis, Naples, Neapolis, New City, beautiful city. So the Greeks named southern Italy. So they were spreading out there, and they were bringing this idea to the colonies that they were founding. Okay, so it's these ideas were spreading out at the same time that the written language was being compiled.
All right, let me back up just a little bit here with you. Now, I've been taught, and I think I know, that classical Greece was a struggle between Sparta and Athens. Now, both were forms of democracy, but there were major differences. Am I correct?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. When we consider Athens and its surrounding area, Attica, we consider that as evolving into a liberal democracy through different stages as to just what a citizen capable of voting was. It started out that the people of Attica demanded property rights, true ownership of property that they could pass off or pass down on to their offspring. This became the requirement for citizenship in Athens, but it was eventually expanded to all people with time. They governed by a true democracy. A majority of 51% takes the issue. But this was shown to lead to serious problems. On the other hand, Sparta only considered the 10,000 people of the warrior class as citizens. With the gradual population increase around their area, in the Peloponnese, actually, this warrior class went out conquering lands to the north for control of food production. Now, their government was a tripartite structure, which was not based upon majority rule. Their social order included themselves at the top. Then there were a group of people who were what we would call free, but were unable to vote. They were called the perioikoi, and that comes from the Greek peri, which means around, and oikos, which means house. So people around my house. And then there were the eloti. The eloti were slaves in the conquered areas who worked the land. You could say that the Spartans were a type of proto-communistic society.
Wait a minute, Dr. Tom. I understood that Greek classical literature, the Greek classical, gave us the concept of freedom. Where did that come from, and what did it mean to the Greeks, freedom?
Well, the concept of freedom, as I said before, was completely unheard of to the point of in classical Greece. Not even a word. There was no word that existed to even describe that state of man. It arose in Athens, not Sparta. Okay, the word that they used was eleftheria. All right, now eleftheria is it's a compound word. It's derived from the ancient Greek eleftho, which means to move towards something, and eros, which means love. You combine them, they mean to move towards that which you love. Eleftheria, all right? So in this sense, eleftheria is to have the free will to choose that which brings love to your soul, or being free of all attachments that weigh you down. According to the Greek philosophers, you can only be free if you are true to yourself. In Greek philosophy, freedom is driven by the choices you make to create the life you desire. Eleftheria also means the absence of oppression or dependence. It is really a truly beautiful way to describe freedom, if you think about it.
Dr. Tom, those words sound an awful lot like something our founding fathers would use to me.
You think? That's what I'm saying. This is where we're getting into the influence of these people on our founding fathers. But let's continue a little bit. All right. Then along come the Romans. All right. I'm telling you, it's a very, fast and loose way of going. But along come the Romans, who studied the Athenians and the Spartans. They found these two city-states, or these two polis. They found them that they had very admirable qualities, both of them, but they merged the notions of governmental structure into what they called the public thing. All right. And in Latin, the public thing is res publica. Okay, you get it? Res publica, the public thing. Sort of sounds like la cosa nostra, our thing that was modeled on the Italian mafia. That's the organized crime in the United States, right? La cosa nostra. But the Romans also had an hereditary caste that monopolized political power, like the Spartans, okay, and an equestrian class, which was the lower of the two aristocratic classes. Now, you can say that they would be based upon the perioikoi, okay? These were called the patricians and the equestrians. The lower class were called the plebeians. And the plebes basically, they were there, that they weren't slaves, but they really didn't have much say in what was going on. They did in a way, and they didn't, but they were really, really outnumbered in their value to the state by the number of slaves that they had. In any case, citizenship was conditioned upon property ownership in the early Republic of Rome, as it was in the early Athenian democracy. In both Republican Rome and early Athens, property ownership gave an individual or gave a person the incentive to fight to protect your city from invaders and to have a say in governance as to how your city was run. So I believe that if you had an estate that was worth, I believe it was 400 sesterces. I'm not exactly sure on the price, but I think it was 400 sesterces. You were considered a member of the equestrian class. Then you can own a horse and become part of the cavalry, which was an obligation to landowners. Now, interestingly enough, in Rome, landowners in the plebeians who were in the Republic could not fight even if they wanted to. They weren't permitted to. So that's one of the things that Rome gave us, aside from the civil society. So
okay. So we've got to get back to Greek culture. And the Romans played a key role in our civilization. So can you give me some of the reasons why that was?
Oh, yes, absolutely. First of all, they gave us the word civilization. In ancient Latin, it would have been pronounced civis. During the classical times, after the 1st or 2nd century, Latin changed to what we would now call ecclesiastical Latin, and they would call it cives, all right, or civis, civitatis, those kinds of things. So they gave us the word civilization. It was the civil state they gave us. The Romans play a key role in our civilization for a few reasons, other than just giving us the name. There's no mystery that they regarded the Greek culture superior to their own, and they assimilated much of it. They also introduced a myriad of philosophical ideas and writings and musings of their own. But when they morphed into an empire, their expansion was absolutely amazing, and they brought Greek culture with them to the conquered lands. As far as our premise goes, here is where things get interesting. A few centuries after Christianity started to spread in the empire, the western part of the Roman Empire collapsed. We set that date at about 476 AD. Before it collapsed, about 100 years before it collapsed, maybe a little bit more, in about 313, the Emperor Flavius Constantine was converted to Christianity and made it the religion of state. Now, this is important. The collapse was a great blow to Italy and Western Europe, sending them into a decline and dissolution, what we refer to as the Dark Ages. The empire continued on, however, as the Eastern Holy Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire, until the year 1453, Anno Domini AD, when the Ottoman Turks captured Constantinople. Now, the Dark Ages were technically the beginning of the Middle Ages. This is the time period which ends with the fall of Constantinople. From the point of view of the written record, this is referred to as post-classical history.
So, if I'm understanding this, the fall of the western part of the Roman Empire resulted in a gradual loss of learnable Greco-Roman culture, correct? And education, philosophy, written history, they were lost. They were forgotten.
Yes. Gradually, over the course of several centuries, there was a recession of culture and literacy. During this time, the only philosophy that was taking hold was Roman Catholic theology. It was centered in Rome, and basically it didn't go anywhere with the fall of the state of Rome, but they remained there even after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. It would eventually come to dominate the remnants of Western Europe. And the knowledge of the classical Greek and Roman thought faded in the West. It continued in the East, however, and the Latin and Greek languages also began to change. But something unforeseeable at the time happened: the birth of Muhammad.
Well, Dr. Tom, how does the birth of Muhammad play into this?
Well, it's very interesting. Muhammad was born in Mecca in 570 A.D., according to our calendar. He had his first revelation in 620 A.D. So he started to formulate the Islamic religion, dedicated to the spreading of the Abrahamic tradition for the most part. And there was a rapid expansion of the faith in all directions from Mecca and then Medina. Okay. By the year 711, Andalusia in Spain falls under Muslim control, where it will dominate for about the next 780 years. All right. By the year 765, this is really not that far away from the life of Muhammad. The Muslims come in contact with Greek philosophy and Indian mathematics for the first time. Now, the works of classical antiquity, as they are approaching Constantinople, let's say, right? They're approaching the Eastern Roman Empire. They begin to collect these works in their original languages, and they begin to translate them into Arabic. And it begins to permeate the areas controlled by the Muslims, including Spain. Now, they're picked up by a long-established Sephardic Jewish communities. They've been there since the first century after Christ. When the Romans, destroyed the Second Temple, they left the Levant and they went to Spain, which is what Sephardic is derived from the Hebrew word for Spain, and they remained there for centuries. When the Arabic language books started to come in, they started to study them in Arabic because they knew the language. Right? So,
I think I know where this is going. You're implying that the writings of classical antiquity were conserved in the Arabic language, even though they were lost to the descendants of those who wrote them.
Yes, you've got it. That's it. That's the point.
So I gather that at some point those works had to be reintroduced.
Yes, yes. Well, yes, yes and no. You could say yes, because St. Augustine.
Don't be so definitive, Nick.
Well, because I have to say that there was an introduction to Greek thought into the Catholic canons as early as the 4th and 5th centuries. So it might have been around the fall of the West. But St. Augustine of Hippo introduced a smattering of Greek thought into Catholic theology in the form of Neoplatonism in the late 4th and early 5th centuries. It was St. Thomas Aquinas, however, who got busy integrating Aristotelian philosophy in the 13th century. Now, here's the thing. St. Thomas had Aristotle's ideas available to him because of Latin translation from Arabic texts provided by the Sephardic Jewish scholars.
Were there any Greek texts still available before the fall of Constantinople?
Yes, there were. Some 200 years later, Constantinople fell, and they were available. Now, Neoplatonism was the foremost philosophical inspiration on Christian thought in its early period, and it's never stopped being a significant part. But Aristotelianism has had a real impact on Christian wisdom.
Well, how so?
Well, once his works on logic, physics, metaphysics, and ethics became available in Latin, Catholic theologians, primarily Thomas, found a new way of looking at the universe which reinforced the concepts of God and man. For example, one of Aristotle's notions that chiefly inspired Thomas was that knowledge is not inborn, but gained from the information collected by the senses. Does it sound like science? And from logical interpretations from self-evident truths, right? Thomas also accepted Aristotle's.
There's that word, self-evident.
Exactly, because you don't need a proof if it's self-evident. It's the Romans would have said ictu oculi. It's a punch in the eye. It's a knock right in the eye. It's obvious, Thomas also accepted Aristotle's conception of metaphysics as the science of being. His doctrine covered many other aspects of Aristotelian thought. Thomas's influence on the following theologians of the Middle Ages cannot be overstated. His views became the dominant tenets of Catholic canonic wisdom. In 1453, Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, and the Middle Ages gradually turned to a rebirth of classical Greco-Roman thought in Christian Europe. A year later, Gutenberg comes up with a way to mass-produce books with his printing press, and the Sephardim become a major producer of those translated works from classical antiquity. We call this the Rinascimento. Now, I prefer this word over Renaissance because I fail to see why a movement started in Italy should be credited to the French. It started in Italy. The French had very little to do with it. So now here we are, a hop, skip, and a jump away from the age of revolutions in the mid-18th century. So the whole point of this is that the ideas of morality and natural law from the ancient Greek philosophers was blended with the Judeo-Christian belief system, which was refined by Roman Catholic theologians to produce a platform to define natural rights based upon natural law.
Okay, well, it appears to me that we've come full circle, that we are finally talking about natural rights and natural law based on a brief history of mankind. So we're going to start to finalize this, wrap it up. Are there any other points that you'd like to make, Dr. Tom?
Yeah, there are a couple of points, just two, briefly. It has to be understood that the founding fathers were unaware of anthropology and archaeology. Now, these sciences were started some 60, 70 years later. They weren't developed, meaning they could only rely on the written history. Okay. And one of the things that we see by giving the common man a voice, giving him freedom, liberation, is that in America, competence rather than inheritance or brute power led to the liberation of talent, of innovation, of productivity, of the common man, which drove the industrial age, the machine age, the age of oil, the jet age, the atomic age, the space age, and on all the way to today. Now, I want you to just make two key observations. When we talk about ages in archaeologic time, okay, those ages lasted for hundreds of thousands of years. Once we liberated the common man to add his talent to our our technological progress, look at how many ages we've gone through in the last 100 years.
And they're accelerating.
Absolutely, they're accelerating.
I mean, the last age, you could say the big data age is only, maybe 10 or 10 years old, 15 years old?
Yeah, about 20 years old, sure, yeah.
Well, here's my observation. It seems like we're moving away from competence, especially in government. It's not a requirement anymore. No,
that seems to be a pretty good observation, and it's sad. Mediocrity seems to be taking the stand. But you're right. Yeah, I believe you're right. Competence, when we see it, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. It boggles the mind when we see competence today. And I'm talking about, obviously, people like Elon Musk and, these kinds of people that are technological wizards. It looks like brilliance when you're right. I believe you're right.
Okay, Tom. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It was a pleasure, even though I think I lost my voice. So you did my wife a favor.
You've been listening to The Liberty Brief, based on the book Unalienable, What It Really Means and Why It Matters by Dr. Thomas Giordano. If you want to help spread the word, please subscribe, like, and share using the links below. You can also check out Dr. Giordano's book on Amazon using the links as well.